COM committees and so forth, there's so many things to kind of draw upon. So I thought I would start by sharing a little bit. I shared a lot about my personal story a couple nights ago, and I know you can access that, or you'll have access to, if you didn't join us for that, you'll be able to see that process. But one I wanted to do tonight was kind of go back to some of my experiences with committees on ministry, and specifically some of the different aspects that committees on ministry work within in their different settings. And so one of my first opportunities to really work with Committee on Ministry was when I had decided initially to go back to seminary. And so, like, you know, anyone who's interested in ministry, you enter into a process with Committee on Ministry, and you ask to be a member in discernment. And obviously, you know, through that process, I, at that point, didn't know much about this process at all. And so I had the opportunity at that point to start to really understand different polity and how that works in the association that I was a part of in the Michigan Conference. During that process, they really walked along with me, which is one of the things that I found to be really beneficial. I saw how the importance and the significance of the relationship between the member in discernment and the Committee on Ministry was. They, you know, coached me through portions of it, whether it was writing the paper for Ecclesiastical Council, or when I initially thought, well, I'm going to do licensed ministry path versus doing an ordained path. So they actually were with me in the beginning of that process, and then walked with me as I decided I wanted to do more than just licensed ministry. I wanted to go to ordained ministry. When I decided, after I had been a member in discernment for a little while, I had taken had been asked to take on a church, and it was a small church along the shores of Lake Michigan in New Buffalo, Michigan, right on the border of Indiana and Michigan, just outside of Chicago by about an hour and a half drive. And when I got there, I was in a different association within the conference. So I had not only one association that I dealt with, but two within the same conference, which was kind of a unique model. They didn't have that kind of typical thing happening. So, but it was really great because I was still connected to my association in the kind of the Grand Rapids area of Michigan. And then, you know, down on the southwest corner, I was involved in that association as well. And so I ended up with two mentors, which, you know, at first sounded like, boy, that's a lot, you know, and maybe I didn't need that much. But as I worked with that process, I found that one mentor was really helping me and focus on me getting through the steps for ordination, going through all of those pieces. And the other one was focused on helping me in ministry. So as I ministered to this small church, he was helping me to guide me as I had questions about ministry and all of the things that would come up through that ministry. So it was a great opportunity for me to really get to know how different associations work within the same state, which I thought was really beneficial. I could see that there were similarities, but there were some differences too in the process. And as you might guess, you know, when you get to working with, get to the point where you're ready to submit your paper and do ecclesiastical councils, boy, do you experience something different there too. As I went through that EC process in my in the conference and in the association I was in, where I was being ordained in my home church, we had a different process from the one that I experienced when I was in New Jersey, as an example. Out in New Jersey, it's part of the Central Atlantic Conference, but New Jersey was its own association. And there I was able to, you know, obviously have been ordained for a while and had been serving a church as an interim pastor, but I had my membership, and that's where my membership is now, is in the Central Atlantic Conference. But what I've learned there was that their EC component was different than what the EC was in Michigan. And so I got to see how that process worked. I would describe the one in Michigan as a very nerve-wracking experience. It was intimidating because, you have this paper that you present, people get it, they read it, and then they just, it's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh, but it feels a little bit like a wild pack of dogs. No offense, Tam, to the dog lovers in the house. But that's what it felt like, like they were coming in and trying to, kind of chew you up a little bit. But what I experienced when I was in New Jersey was a different way. And the way they did it was a much more like a dialogue. And it was really somebody sharing kind of their personal experience of their journey. And it became a very powerful thing, I think, for those, for each person that was a member in discernment that was going through that process. And I got to see some of that with a few different people that I got to know in that area. So there were some great experiences that I've had, just starting to get familiar with different associations and different COMs and how they function and how they operate. So I think that it's kind of helps me to bring something different, and that is kind of a broader sense of how things can happen, and again, how they can be different in different settings. As you travel around a bit, you can imagine that you also experience different systems for boundary training. That's another one of those pieces that is, vital to ministry, and having healthy ministry. And so I really appreciated the opportunity when I did it in Michigan, where I'd spent most of my life and went through that process. I recognized that their boundary training was set up in a specific way, and it was the same boundary training, and they did it, every 3 years you had to go through it. When I moved to Ohio, where I experienced another kind of boundary training, they looked at it as more of a, how can we use this as not just boundary, but how can we use it as continuing education, and broaden it and give us more depth and meaning to it. And then when I came here to California and started having conversations with the conference staff here, again, became more familiar and aware that when we're looking at not just boundary training, but we're looking at, again, continuing education credits, and how do we keep pastors and up to education levels where we continue to encourage them to go back and pursue more knowledge and more just whether it's attending a seminar or whether it's actually going to a class at PSR, or somewhere else where there's an educational component. I think lots of people really gain different things from those experiences. But I've been gaining knowledge about how all of these different places that I've served and been a part of, that they have their different ways about it. And so I've seen some pros and some cons to those things. And I think that's also beneficial. I like to think of it, and I use this terminology a lot, and I used it the other night, but I like to think outside of the pew. I don't like to keep things contained. I think that we have great ways that we can do things differently. And if we just keep thinking, about how can we do it differently and exploring new ideas, sometimes you'll fail and something won't work. That's fine. We'll go back to the drawing board. We've now learned maybe something from that model, and we can take what we've learned and then apply it to a new model. So I think those are some really great things that I've learned. Boundary training is certainly important. Those continuing educations are important. I find also, or have found in my experience, that the importance of the installations and the ordinations. What great opportunities I have been exposed to as I've traveled around to be in so many different places and experience and meet so many great people, and to see how different people approach an installation of, whether it's a pastor or a chaplain, whether it is, a lay minister. All of these things are really great, and to be part of, all of the clergy coming together and robing up and wearing their red. I love when we get to wear the red, because I have red shoes. So it's one of my favorite things. I got a great red stole with flames on it that my wife made, and I put that on, and I just love being together with so many other people, because it's just that moment of celebration. And then the laying on of hands, which is, it's so powerful that when I've experienced those things. And I truly just have, had a real blessed experience, I think, in ministry, because of all of those different places that I've been, and all those different opportunities to really explore what it means to be the church, and how we can be the church, whether we're using Zoom and our modern technology, or whether we're physically together and feeling that Spirit calling to us and inviting us into a deeper relationship with one another. So I think there's some real blessings, and I really am excited about this kind of opportunity to work with the different COMs in Missouri. I know that we've got a few of those around, and I'm excited about being able to meet with those of you who are on those committees and to see how we can do ministry together, and I'm excited about it. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a breath and of who I am and where I've come from.
Thank you so much. It took me a minute to find my cursor there. I'm going to hand it over now to Hannah and the search committee to share a bit of their thoughts.
Yeah, we have several people from the search committee here, so I will try to keep my comments a little bit brief. I chaired the search committee, and we received 13 profiles. And as we were looking through these profiles, well, one, we had a lot of guidance from Lee Albertson, who is the conference minister search coordinator for the UCC. He is a delightful human being and was super helpful in this process. And we developed some priorities that we were looking for. One being somebody who was ordained in full standing with the UCC with 5 years or more of experience. And we also obviously focused on COM experience and wisdom and search and call experience. So from those 13 profiles, we narrowed it down to 6 people who we had Zoom interviews with. They were from all over the place. And I really have to say that as we received these profiles and we're looking through them, and I felt the weight of how difficult this decision would be, because we have so many really interesting and talented and passionate people in the United Church of Christ, which I was really thankful for. But we did narrow it down to these 6 people who we had Zoom interviews with. And I felt like we were Spirit-led the whole time, because we really focused in on 2 people as a committee and really came together around them. And so we invited those 2 for in-person interviews at the Oasis United Church of Christ in Jefferson City, which was fun to be there. And we, after the interviews, settled in around Damien for lots of reasons. We really were struck by how pastoral he is. Maybe this is weird, Damien, that I'm talking about you while you're here. But also he has a clear passion and a love for the church, and a desire and a readiness to move into conference ministry. And it felt like we could affirm that call for him to conference ministry. He was, even in an interview setting, a really great listener, and it became a really great conversation to have together. So we really felt good about this decision, and we're excited to introduce Damien to you. So I would love for, if the other committee members who are here, Les is here and Patty is here, Eric is back. I think that's all of us that are here. So do any of you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
I'll go ahead and echo a lot of what Hannah said. It was the nights of interviewing 3 people via Zoom. The second night that we did that, I was like, let's just figure out the 2. And it was just so overwhelming, the 6 candidates that we had, that we all needed time to discern what we had heard from them to be able to come down to our list. So we took another night out of our schedule to spend a couple hours to narrow it down. But once we did that and we were able to meet with him in person, I echo with what Hannah said. He was pretty quick for me to make the decision. It took I don't know, I was just very comfortable with him and very happy to have him here. So.
I'll, Les, are you wanting to speak there, bud?
You spoke first, go ahead.
All right. So yeah, totally agree with what Hannah had to say. And just to share some of my own personal take on the final interview with Damien there in Jeff City. I think there's a few things that it's important to lift up that are wonderful things. One is his focus on relationships, building them and maintaining them. He loves road trips, which I identify with an awful lot. And so wandering around our fairly large conference is something he's comfortable and good with. And you've already heard a bit about his creativity and willing to think outside of the pew, as he says, and thinking about new ways to be the church, which we all are experiencing in big ways now, whether we like it or not, and things will likely continue to change. So, and also on that pastoral note, his respect and care for pastors is very deep, and since he's kind of like one of our the minister to the ministers, I think that's really important to highlight, that he's there to work with COMs and the laity, and around authorization, which his respect for the office of pastor will give him a keen eye when it comes to members of discernment and authorization for ministry, I think. And you know, I don't mind saying I had a difficult moment in the interview. We were talking about an issue that was rather personal to me. And so I got a bit emotional, but the way that he handled that and listened to me and others in the room was pretty remarkable and appreciated. And so yeah, I'm very pleased that we're at this point having this conversation. I love seeing you all in person, so I'm sad we are not doing this at a CAG, but here we are anyway, and I'm thankful for that. So on to Les.
Well, I'll just add that I'd never been on a search committee in a church setting before. I've done that, you know, in my occupation in the past, and it was interesting to kind of see the contrasts of how it came about here within our search committee. I liked the fact that we were, all of us were very open in working to a final candidate, and how we could, you know, very openly discuss what we saw and what we liked and what maybe was a lesser characteristic of some of the candidates. But in the end, it came down to just one person, and we were unanimous in our process, unanimous in our feeling that we had made the right choice here with Damien. And I think it was, you know, it was spirit moved that got us to that position. So I guess that's about all I have to say.
I will say one more thing, that we also felt like Damien would be a really good teammate for Jenny, which is important to have the leaders of our conference able to work well together. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Thank you. Any other comments from the search committee?
One, just a big note of gratitude to Hannah for all she did to keep us going and keep us organized. And
Yes.
the search committee was just a wonderful group of people. And so it was, yeah, I appreciated the experience.
Yes, thank you to Hannah and to all of you for your vital and spirit-led work. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I would invite you either to just go ahead and speak or raise your hand, like actually raise your hand, not use the raise your hand button because I can't actually see that. So feel free to raise your actual hand or just jump in there so that I don't, yeah, go ahead, ask your questions.
I guess I'll go. Hi, Damien, Don Franzen again.
Hi, Don.
You know, you talked about all the wonderful things that you got to participate in the Committee on Ministry. And I agree, there are lots of wonderful things that happen. But we also know that we have to deal with some of the ugliness of what takes place. And, you know, there are times when, you know, when that wears on you. There's times when that, you know, it weighs on you, it wears on you. And I know you have, you know, your Mustang that you could play with to get away from it all. But when you see a committee on ministry that's working on something very difficult, what kind of wisdom or what kind of words do you have to say to them as they're struggling with their own emotions about dealing with the issue?
Yeah, thanks, Don. I think it's an excellent question. You know, yeah, you know, I've seen some of that ugly. You know, there's been a couple of times that I've known pastors, as an example, that have gone through a fitness review. And unfortunately, you know, one of those situations didn't turn out well for that pastor. And it left, you know, its mark on the church and on that pastor. And I think when it comes to those kinds of situations, you know, my sense is the pastoral response maybe is to just say, you know, to make sure that I'm truly listening to the COMs, you know, and that we have a chance even after kind of dealing with some of those situations that are difficult and challenging and you know, weighing on our minds, is to really just, you know, reach out to the members of those COMs and check in, you know, and say, you know, we had a tough one yesterday, you know, how were you feeling today about those kinds of things? You know, that's, to me, you know, this is ministry is absolutely, you're right. It's good days, it's bad days. You know, working on committees have good days and bad days. And it's through our covenantal relationship and walking together on that journey. And in knowing that it is by our faith that we can get through these difficult situations together, and knowing that yes, there's going to be difficult times and there's going to be difficult conversations and decisions that have to be made that are tough, but knowing that we're in it together. And I think, you know, to me, you know, somebody that's on a committee like that is volunteered their time, and what a gracious thing to give up your time to serve on a committee like that is so important, and it's so vital to the work that we do as a church. But you know, to make those difficult decisions, sometimes we have to make those, and my hope is always that we can be there for one another, you know, and really be supportive of each other. And the conference is, in my experience, is that place where we can always find kind of a rock when the storm is kind of rocky, when the waters are tough, there's somebody there to grab onto and give us support. And that's my own personal experience of what I've worked with some great conference ministers and ACMs and had those experiences where, boy, when I was having a tough time, they were there. And I think that's really important.
Rhonda, I saw you raise your hand.
There we go. Yes, I did. And kind of to tag on to Don, he covered a little bit of what I was going to talk about. But you do have, it sounds like you've had kind of the normal experience of most pastors, going through school and having contact with the Committee on Ministry that way. And I don't think that your situation is unusual, at least not around here, because we have a lot of people that may be Eastern Association, but they're, going to school in St. Louis, and we've got licensed pastors that are back and forth, and so that's kind of not really normal around here, but it's not that unusual. But the thing that I'm wondering is, you've never really served on a committee on ministry. What do you see as your biggest challenge in working with the committees on ministry? Because that's going to be a big part of the job.
Sure. Appreciate the question on that, Rhonda. I would say that, biggest challenges is probably that I haven't worked on, I haven't served on one. I have worked closely with committees on ministry, in different settings. I think, that the challenge is a worthy challenge. I think, I'm very, through the manual on ministry, the newest one, and, knowing the ins and outs of what COMs, do is important. And I know a lot of those parts and pieces. I'm not unfamiliar with what COMs do. And I would say that, with Jenny, by my side, there's guidance there, and help there to understand things that I may not know, or challenges that I may need to overcome as well. I think, again, I would just say that, my experience of working in so many different associations and conferences and getting to know members of those COMs, really, I know a lot of the ins and outs of it, even though I haven't actually served on one officially. So I think, there's always a learning curve, and, we all have them, and mine will certainly be, this is a role that I've, never served in, but I am, ready and willing to take on the challenge.
Can I speak a little bit to that? So I'm aware that's one of those pieces that he doesn't have, is the experience serving on a committee on ministry. And so before the pandemic, what I had talked to MESA, which is the ministry, it's the office in the national setting that supports and resources our committees on ministry. I had asked if it would be possible for Damien to come in to Cleveland one day and meet with each of the MESA staff and to have conversations, and for them to begin to share about their particular area. And so I share that to say that I'm aware that's a part of what we will be offering to Damien, so that we're not just throwing him in with the committees on ministry and say, okay, hope you learn it quickly. But my hope and my plan is to give some training from the MESA perspective, my perspective in that team effort, as well as the committees on ministry themselves.
All right, other questions?
Don't be shy, ask away.
Gary?
Hi, Damien. I'm Gary Schulte, and I'm wondering, having served in a variety of conference settings, do you have someone out there who embodies the kind of conference person you would like to be?
Wow, great question, Gary. How long do I have, and how big of a list can I create? There, kidding aside, I have lots of great mentors, people that I look up to that do great work. I've got a friend of mine, Bonnie, and she's wonderful. Was ACM when I was in Ohio and is now a CM in Pennsylvania. Another great friend of mine was an ACM in New York, handled the 5 suburbs, or the 5 boroughs, excuse me, and is now the conference minister, Central Atlantic Conference. Not to mention, just all of the ones that I've met here in California, from Diana to Daniel and Davina. So I have lots of great people that I know. And I also look at that as not just people that I know, but people that I can reach out to, that I can, call and say, I'm working on this, and, talking through this. And, I think we all need mentors. We all need somebody to talk to. And obviously, Jenny comes highly recommended as a wonderful conference minister to work for. Through several of my colleagues that know Jenny, they told me what a great person she would be to work with. And so I think it's through those connections that will help me to, continue to work towards being an ACM and being a stronger ACM for the conference. And I think that's important. I look forward to when ACMs gather together and conference staff gathers together and have meetings on a fairly regular basis, from what I understand. So I look forward to those opportunities to connect and to build those bridges even more.
Other questions? Don't all jump at once. What was that, Damien?
I said it's a quiet group tonight.
It is. Mike?
Where do you stand on alternative paths to ordination?
Yeah, so I was one of those people that was on the, was seeking an alternative path. Initially, as I mentioned earlier tonight, I was doing the license path through a program we called STEM in Michigan, Systematic Training for Effective Ministry. And it was one of those things. I was involved in that, and I had a colleague of mine who had been ordained. He was a good friend of mine, and he was struggling with that. He felt like you had to do the traditional route or the traditional path. But, through years of conversation, understanding that I think alternative paths are acceptable. In certain situations, they work. We have, as an example, in the Hawaii conference, there's a good example of where it's hard for them to get ordained people to come out to the islands because of the cost of living and the expense to take on seminary and that, and then to return to work there. So alternative paths to ministry in Hawaii, I know at least a number of years back was still a path that was was something that was favorable, and it was a good path. And I have friends of mine that are licensed, have been licensed and then have gotten ordained after serving churches as licensed pastor for a number of years in the UCC. So I've seen and watched people go through that path or take those alternative paths towards ordination, which I think shows again some of our kind of the uniqueness, the autonomy of the UCC, but that covenantal relationship is really important through those, and I believe in that. So the COMs I know are vital to that process.
Yeah, Betsy.
So I'll go. Hi, Damien. I'm Betsy. I am one of the co-chair of the Committee on Ministry Preparation in St. Louis. So I hesitate to ask you this detailed question, given the fact that you haven't worked on a COM before, but I'm going to throw it anyway. I decided I would. One of the challenges that our particular committee has right now, and will probably be our greatest challenge over the next 12 months, has to do with a CPE requirement. We are an island surrounded by both the disciples and the UCCs right now of committees not requiring it, but we do. And we're really struggling with that as a committee right now. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So just, can you give me a little bit more context? So you require the CPE credits?
So the Committee on Ministry Preparation deals only with candidates who are in either the pipeline or the process of going towards ordination, so MIDs and people in the pipeline. And so one of the requirements we have right now is that candidates, in order to be ordained, must complete 1 unit of CPE.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to do that as well. And, you know, almost all the conferences that I've been in all require that CPE program piece. I think there are some challenges. I know that here in California, as an example, I have one of my people on staff is seeking ordination. And so she is trying to find a CPE program, and there are not too many close by. It would require her to drive to the city, which for her, that's like a 3-hour drive. So I think it's, you know, that can be a challenge at times, you know, for, you know, depending on, you know, where you live, for people to get to. But I think CPE, you know, is important. I mean, to say the least. When I went through it, it was a experience that at moments it was really tough. It was really hard, you know, to write your report at the end of a week, and, you know, to dig into discussion about what it's like to, you know, to be doing, you know, these on-call hours, and to be dealing with people who are dying and in tragic situations. So, you know, I think that it's an important requirement, just as much as the psychological evaluation, I think, is important to that process. You know, I recognize that maybe there are some that may feel differently about it, but I'm pro CPE. So I've got friends of mine that are chaplains in Chicago, so maybe I'm a little biased.
Thank you.
So I could go. This is Karen. I'm on the Eastern Association Committee on Ministry, and I'm just wondering, we have a lot of, in our association, smaller churches, rural churches, that are, it's hard to find pastors for them. And so at our association meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about how churches could work together, you know, either as clusters or share resources or share pastors or yoke, or just wondering what kind of experience you have about helping churches resource with each other to provide their needs.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I was involved in some of that right away. When, you know, I was serving a church, my first church that I served as a solo pastor, serving that church for about 2 years, and then decided that I wanted, you know, it was a part-time church and I needed to, you know, have more sustainability financially for my family. And so we yoked 2 churches together. And so that was because of the work that the association worked with me, kind of side by side, to say, okay, let's evaluate, you know, what churches we have nearby you that are needing a pastor. And we actually looked, even because we were on that border of Indiana. So I worked with Reverend Carrie Call, and met with her and said, you know, what do we have in Indiana? Because we're actually close enough. Is there a church there that I could yoke together and serve? And so, I love that idea of looking at those resources. I mentioned the other night that I've been reading a book called Part-Time Pastor. And it's a great book, really talking about we often talk about, kind of part-time ministry as not being vital ministry. And I love the fact that this book completely flips it on its head and says, no, this is, part-time ministry can be very vital and very fulfilling, and looked at it from the perspective of, even if you're serving 2 part-time churches, that each of those has its own vitality and can really grow 2 churches, strong in their faith. And I think that was really positive. So I love the idea of, working with other, looking at other churches and talking to churches and trying to figure out how to do that. I'll also just add that when I was in Ohio, and I was serving on a committee working with church vitality, we did church growth, and we did church and new church growth, and then also church vitality. We took a couple of churches that were nearby, and we had 3 churches that actually came together. But it took us about a year or so to really get those conversations to kind of be less heated, because there was a loss of identity, I think, that folks were feeling. And we really kind of we were able to help them come together and see that it's, that we can come together and work out some of those differences. And we helped them to kind of establish one church with, from 3 of those congregations. And it turned out to be a very, lucrative or successful church in that way.
Thank you. I have to say that my internet went blip on me just at the moment you were saying the name of that book. So if you could just repeat the name of the book.
Yes, Part-Time Pastor.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Well, everybody must be just ready to vote.
Yes. On that note, as we enter final thoughts and talking about voting, I encourage you all to register for CAG if you have not already. We need you there. We need to be church together. And in this time, we are doing that in a new way. So register for CAG, encourage your colleagues, your friends, your church folks, your delegates to register. Any other closing thoughts?
Andrea, can I share a little bit?
Please do.
I worked with the search committee and was blown away by their focus, very different, coming from different places, and that was very intentional for us. And I want to share why I really resonated and connected with Damien, especially in the area of Committee on Ministry. Damien, as you can already hear, has a love for the church and ministers. As he has said, he thinks outside of the pew, which shows his creativity. And he's able to balance those, as he's shared about different expressions and different ways. I think that he will bring that to our committees on ministry in real-time ways, in his love for the church in all of its expressions in different ways, and his love for those who are being called as ministers in different expressions. Damien also has a spiritual maturity that is grounded in the sacred scriptures and in a spiritual discipline for himself and spiritual practice. And he's able to listen and be open to where others are, which I think is very important for Committee on Ministry, ministry from that perspective. The third, which is rather unique, is that I listened and heard from him a call specifically to conference ministry. And that's different than a call for a local church. And I heard that in his expression and passion and the conversations and relationships that he has cultivated with conference ministers and associate conference ministers, that his love of the church in this moment is being expressed and called by God through conference ministry. And that was very much exciting to me. Finally, he was excited about the possibility of moving specifically to the Missouri Mid-South Conference. This yearning in our conversations with him of wanting to travel, of wanting to live in the central part of Missouri so that he could be closer to those in the Western Association, those in Arkansas, those in Memphis, and those in the Eastern Association and the St. Louis Association. And for me, that's really exciting to have a team member in this new way of doing an associate conference minister from this expression. So I am very excited about the possibility of being in ministry with the Missouri Mid-South Conference, and especially with Reverend Damien Lake.
Thanks, Jenny.
Any other closing thoughts? Well, friends, I thank you all for being here this evening. We will have another one of these on Monday at 6. So we invite you to join us again if you'd like to learn more or if more questions occur to you. But thank you all for your time this evening. Stay safe, stay kind, and we will see each other again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
See you
Damien.
guys. Bye.